My name is Zoltan Istvan. I'm a transhumanist activist, also the 2016 presidential nominee of Transhumanist Party. I'm also a journalist. I've been written for National Geographic, New York Times, and a lot of other places. But through, circumstances and a book called The Transhumanist Wager, I became a public figure in the transhumanist movement, and now I spend basically all my time trying to push forward this movement of science and technology. But what most people really know transhumanism for is that it's a social movement that wants to upgrade the human being into cyborgs, pure data, artificial intelligence, genetic editing types of entities, whatever it is. But it's a radical science and technology movement that's trying to make human beings something much more than they are right now. Well, I go back and forth between which technologies I'm looking most forward to. It's got to be either AI or genetic editing, both which are total game changers. Now, genetic editing allows you literally to modify the human being into anything you want to be, include like you enter the Star Wars era. We can grow a fourth arm, you can grow a tail, you can grow a brain 3 times your size. Or it's artificial intelligence, this idea that you can kind of merge your brain into a machine or upload it, and then all of a sudden you're moving the speed of light essentially with calculations and intelligence and all these things. Now, both these technologies are already here, but which is going to be the one that wins out over the next 30, 40, 50 years? Which one brings upon the singularity? No one knows, but it's somewhere between those two technologies that I'm most optimistic about. Well, the big question I'm being asked by a lot of media right now is if I'm going to run in 2020, especially after what I think a lot of people consider a pretty successful 2016 run. Even though I was a third-party candidate, we got tons of media coverage, about 100 million views of the campaign. I'll just try to be as honest as I can without giving away too much. We are very seriously thinking about running in 2020. When I say we are, I have a team. There's a lot more money involved this time and all these other things. So we're looking at very seriously how to make the biggest impact that we can in 2020. You'll probably hear something in the next few weeks, one way or the other. But, there are a lot of different scenarios for running and whether we can make an impact. The truth of the matter is, we don't have much shot at winning the presidency this time around, but this is a 20-year haul. You keep running and eventually one day you might win. It might be 10, 15, 20 years from now. But, you keep at it and eventually there's going to be a transhumanist presidential candidate who wins. Do I think the singularity will happen in the near future? The answer is, this is a tough one. Yes, it will. But is it going to be something that is so remarkable as we think of it in terms of, all this information happening in just a tiny little span of time? Maybe. Will everybody else get to experience it? Maybe not. Maybe it'll only just be a few people. I mean, the singularity is this quasi-religious concept where what basically the thing, people need to know is that no one can understand what the singularity is because our human brains, which are just 3 pounds of meat, cannot fathom it. It's this moment in time when all of history, all of knowledge exponentially grows, and you might experience more in 5 seconds of time than all of history combined before it. That's how fast transactions, the intelligence, evolution, and the growth of the microprocessor and all these things might become. Basically, the microprocessor is on a J curve, and at some point it keeps, doubling in capacity, and at some point maybe it doubles in capacity every second. Am I a believer in it? I do believe in it, but how it can unfold, really, the human brain can't know. But if some of the experts are right, and we look at the trajectories, sometime between 2050 and 2070, something like that should happen where AI just literally takes off, and we don't even, as humans, we become almost like ants. We just can't even fathom what's happening. So, I used to not think of time travel as realistic because, a lot of people want to know if time travel can exist. But recently, there's been some professors that have said, look, maybe it is possible. And then you go to the Star Trek where you take this kind of teleportation thing. And now recently, they've had some successful experiments where they've taken subatomic particles, at least points of them, and teleported them a little distance. If that trajectory grows and that kind of research grows, it's possible we might get to a point when we could do something like that. I definitely wouldn't say no to it. But right now, the physics isn't broadly supporting it. But that said, hey, the physics broadly didn't support a lot of things 200-300 years ago for what scientists thought they knew. Every single decade, we're discovering new things. I mean, the God particle that they discovered, I guess 7-8 years ago now is changing the way we look at modern physics. So is it possible? I would say it's probably possible. Is it understandable in terms of how we know it right now? Not whatsoever. But, if I was a betting man, I'd say, yeah, I'd probably bet on it. So one of the things that I have done as a transhumanist is gotten a microchip in my one of my hands, my left hand, and it allows me to, open my front door. You can start a car. You can hold Bitcoin in it. You can do a lot of little, I'll call them party tricks because it's nothing too fascinating. And you can also be identified to keep all your medical records and stuff like that in it. And, you get it injected. It's put in through a horse syringe, just a very large syringe. I just have it here in my right hand, and it's just tiny. It's about the size of a grain of rice. I used to think this technology was going to kind of take over the world in the sense that everyone was going to get it because I love, I'm a surfer and I'm a jogger, and I love not leaving the house without having to worry about keys. But unfortunately, because of, just scanning iris technology, or being able to scan your eyeball, or even facial recognition, or even thumbprint recognition now, it looks like the implant might not be the technology of the future that I 4 or 5 years ago when I got my implant thought it was going to be. It's probably going to be iris scanning right now is the technology that you'll be able to pay through and communicate through when you want to open an email and you need a password, or open your door, or your car will sense you because you just look at it and it'll sense your iris. So these are the new technologies coming, but I do have an implant and it's fun to do. And mine sends out a text message if you come really close to me. Mine says win in 2016 because that's I got it during the presidential campaign. So it's a fun little thing. I 100% think that there's no question that we're very soon, probably 3 or 4 years, going to have something commercially available where we can interface directly with machine intelligence in real time. Whether it's through a Neuralink or through some type of brain implant or even just headsets. That's what a lot of people are using right now. There's no question when you look at what brainwave technology has done just in the last few years. I mean, it's growing exponentially. It was like 4 years ago that they were able to talk to each other in each other's mind and say hello from India to a place in France. But now they're like racing drones in Florida wearing these brainwave technology headsets. There's like no controls. You just think this drone and you think it around a racetrack and you go as fast as you can. And that's, so what's going to happen in 3 or 4 years? I mean, I'm pretty certain that at some point your telephone will be entirely in your brain. And if it's not in your brain, it'll be controlled through a whole bunch of other different mechanisms that access your brain through brainwave technology. And that's how you control the internet. So, absolutely this stuff is coming. There's, and some of the technologies, I'm not sure how much money is going to be poured into it. But I can tell you with this specific technology, billions and hundreds of billions of dollars are going to be poured into it. I mean, I have this question with my 5 and 9-year-old daughters. Will they be able to download education by the time they get to college? And the reality is by the time my 5-year-old gets to college, there's a very good chance that she will be able to download some education through these brainwave, either headsets or implants. And, do you then save for college? Do you then go to college? There's all these weird questions. And if you want to become a fireman or a fire person, if you want to become, a police officer, if you want to become whatever it is, an engineer, can you download all that stuff? Well, that's why this brainwave technology stuff and like Neuralink has so much money being funded into it, because we're talking about revolutionizing how humans get information. We're essentially entering the Matrix age where everything can be downloaded. You can be an expert at anything you want. You can have 20 PhDs. I absolutely think that AI will become conscious to a point that you can't distinguish from a human being. And I would say that moment in time is going to be here within 6 to 8 years. The question, though, is not that. The question is, how soon will it be here that it discovers that it doesn't maybe like humans and wants to become more than humans, and we haven't programmed it to do that. And that's where the experts differ. They say it's, maybe 2065, something further out. But I'd say it's probably closer to 2030, 2035. in terms of artificial intelligence just simply being smarter than any other human being on the planet in basically every way. And I think people don't really understand how quickly, the microprocessor is kind of evolving and how quickly software and technology are evolving with it. I mean, these things, 2, 4, 8, 16, 30, very quickly, this stuff becomes super intelligent. And once that happens, it's sort of a goner for human beings. I'm not saying the human race will end. I'm just saying there's no chance of keeping up with AI. And that's why things like the Neuralink or brainwave technology or headsets that connect us to AI are so important of a technology to develop, because the most important thing that happens when AI gets here is that we develop a technology that allows us to immerse ourselves directly into this AI consciousness, so that if AI goes anywhere and does anything and maybe leaves, decides it doesn't want to be part of our little kind of inferior species, we will go with it. And that's what's critical, I think, to AI, is really our own sense of integrating our consciousness into it. Well, I'm one of those that really does worry about artificial intelligence destroying humanity. I think all the experts that say that are 100% right. I mean, why wouldn't it? I mean, okay, maybe why wouldn't it? Maybe it wouldn't either. Maybe it's 50-50, but I'm not willing to wager a 50-50 game with the human race. So whatever happens, we either need to be integrated into AI, or we need to have some kind of foolproof mechanisms that can stop AI should it become rogue and decide it wants to do something harmful to us. But I think it's the greatest, I think it's the greatest national and global security challenge that the human race has ever faced. It's way worse than any kind of plague I think we've ever gone through. We could have an AI that simply says, I'm going to send the entire human race back to the Dark Ages, which doesn't really leave us with much. It can shut off water systems, it can shut off the power, it can shut off the internet, it can shut off everything. And we're kind of left with, what do we do? And then beyond that, it can create robots in a very similar Terminator scenario, or nuclear weapons and stuff like that, and just start killing people. And of course, it doesn't need much of it to survive. It just needs some solar panels and, keeping the machines charged. I mean, it's a very dangerous predicament, and I think a lot of attention, not enough attention, is given to this amazingly, complicated quandary that the human race faces with AI. Well, generally, I really believe that technological advancement is the best thing for the human race. I think that, at least until we get to the AI age, then it's a very different thing, because right now there's no question, according to the World Bank, the last 30 years, people are living longer, people are living better, people have more prosperity. If you look at all the numbers, people are just simply living better. There's just less people dying and less people, basically getting disease, and people just having better lives. And it's all because of one thing. Well, two things: science and technology. Because of these different types of things that come through the system, whether it's cooking over, gas fires, or vaccines, or driving to work instead of having to walk 100 miles, whatever it is, and new types of medicines, people live better. But we get to a point when that may not always be the case, because potentially with AI, you have, the end game where something decides it doesn't need biological entities whatsoever on planet Earth. So humanity tries to get wiped out or erased. So right now, there's no question that science and technology has been the greatest boom ever for humanity. That doesn't mean that we can't look forward and say it may not always be the case. We do have to just keep an open mind to these things. We can create our own demise, and we have to be very careful of that. Well, I speak about AI presidencies and AI government quite a bit, but will we ever really have an AI that leads us, and robots that vote? This is another thing. I mean, there are now something like 80 billion, machine intelligences out there already, through your phone, through Siri, through this, through that. I mean, there's an enormous amount. At what point does some of this stuff demand voting rights? Well, not yet, because nothing's smart enough, but maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, that could be a whole nother issue. But there's a very good chance we'll have an AI president or AI set of rules that govern the human race. But I am pretty convinced that could not last very long. Because you have to understand, when we talk about the AI age, we're talking about something that's 10 to 15 years. And the reason is that every age, so we have the human age, we have the primate age, there's, virus age. There's all these ages, and they keep getting shorter. And the AI age is probably going to last 10 or 15 years, or maybe even less, before it becomes something like the quantum intelligence age, where then, intelligence spans the cosmos, it spans subatomic matter, it knows how to work itself within, the real structure of the universe, and then doesn't need machine parts. Even machine parts are kind of like something to become obsolete at some day. So, even if we did have an AI government, it would probably only last a few years before real AI evolved into something else. Again, the big thing here is we need to make sure that humans are able to integrate themselves to the very first AIs so that their consciousness is one with it or part of it, and at least we get to go for the ride. There's no sense of pretending that our human brain is ever going to keep up with AI, but at least we'll be an intrinsic part of it, and then we could continue on that journey and maybe expand our intelligence that way. But, at some point, AI, beyond government, doesn't even have things like governments, nations, things like that, economies. It just is a pure AI world where looking for what is the next world. And like I said, the next world is probably quantum intelligence, which is intelligence at the levels of quarks or intelligence at the level of subatomic particles, where everything just sort of is one with another. And you can almost think of it in terms of spirituality or ghost or like God, where intelligence just spans the universe, connects in that kind of way. Now, we don't understand the technology for that yet, but I can assure you that the AI age is just going to be a short little phenomenon as well. Well, I think most of the human civilization will move inwards. It's a lot of effort to get to Mars, and then we got to kind of get used to the planet and learn new technologies. It's just going to be so much easier to upload. Once we figure out uploading, it's like that's where the real world is. That's where the planned paradises are. That's where we can really start expanding our sense of self. Because as long as we're always just trying to get to Mars, we're still biological. And I think it's really, it's going to be inside the ones and zeros and that kind of mainframe system where we really, I know that sounds a little ironic, but we'll find a lot more complexity in a giant machine intelligence than we will as biological beings just going to Mars and having a really hard time to grow a potato there. I mean, the future of humanity is not eating, it's not drinking, it's not five senses, touch and smell. I mean, we're talking about millions of senses. We're talking about, already the fastest supercomputers today can do 200,000 trillion calculations per second. What are they going to do in 20 or 30 years? I mean, I don't even know the name of these numbers these things can start doing, but they're going to do trillions and trillions and trillions of times of Google numbers, and that kind of sophistication, that kind of intelligence doesn't need to necessarily go off planet, because it only takes a few cycles, maybe a few years or a few months or even a few days before that intelligence starts to expand and evolve into something, as I mentioned, beyond the AI age. So I just think this idea of getting off planet, it's very important, because if an asteroid comes or if AI consumes humanity, it'd be really good to have a bunch of biological, Homo sapiens outside of planet Earth. However, when you talk about the species now, it's an upload phenomenon. That's where we're all going. So, transhumanist number one goal is to try to live indefinitely through science and technology. And that's a bit of a selfish goal. And, that's just sort of how it is. But, we're people that most of us don't believe in an afterlife, or we don't want to find out if there is one because we're scared there isn't one. And so we want to try to live indefinitely through science and technology. And I think ultimately, there will be overpopulation. It's the number one concern of people living dramatically longer through transhumanist technologies, that we already have a very overpopulated planet. However, when you look at the 50-year scheme of things, it's possible that the planet might get to 10 billion people or 12 billion people, and I already think the planet's overpopulated. And I already think climate change is happening and all these other things. I think that stuff. I see it. Okay, it's not too dramatic, at least where I live, but I can see it. We are definitely overpopulated, especially in major cities. But the reality is, over a 50-year window, when you start talking about uploading technology, you start talking about the singularity, you start talking about becoming cyborgs that don't have to eat anymore because they have solar power all over their body, and that's how they rejuvenate themselves. We're talking about a planet stabilizing. not a planet stabilizing because the environment has disappeared, but a planet stabilizing because humans have taken nature and controlled it to such an extent that they no longer need to breathe air. They no longer need to eat. They no longer need to do those things. And hopefully their brains are now connected to AI as is also expanding. And maybe they're uploading themselves. And so they're living in a giant server. You know, they say already the entire human race can be contained in a 9-mile wide box, basically of ones and zeros, giant server. And that's not very big, 9 miles wide, you know, when you give it how big the Earth is. And then you could roam in there. So when you talk about overpopulation, you talk about environmental issues, you talk about all these other stuff, I see the issues, but it's only issues if we remain human beings. If we do the upgrades and we do these things that we think transhumanist agendas would support, you know, uploading ourselves, we're going to find ourselves in a very different world, a world that isn't so dependent upon nature, maybe not dependent at all, and isn't so dependent upon overpopulation or whether that kind of thing exists. The places we're going can have trillions and trillions and trillions of entities. And most transhumanists like myself, don't want just one Zoltan. Man, I want millions. I mean, that's one of the very first things transhumanists are going to do who are trying to overcome death is like, let's clone one Zoltan, let's clone another Zoltan, let's make it bigger and bigger and bigger, because survival is not just survival of oneself, it kind of becomes survival of a family, survival of one's genes, survival of one's thoughts, survival of one's memories, survival of one's kind of ones and zeros. So it's very possible we get to a point when everybody has multiple versions of themselves in multiple uploads, and maybe even a bunch of biological entities, and probably none that eat or need the environment. But, you know, planet Earth can probably have 100 billion people on it. It just has to be that nobody drinks the water or eats and destroys the planet. I mean, these are things that we can do. It's just we need the technology to do that. Now, I know I give you a bunch of radical ideas, but transhumanists see it in a very different world. We don't see it as planet Earth anymore sustaining mammalian life or mammals. We see it in terms of cyborgism, in terms of AI uploading, in terms of what's the singularity. And the singularity is not an Earth phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of the universe. It's a phenomenon of spanning the cosmos through intelligence and different types of, you know, our brains merging with the real matter of the universe and kind of spanning. It gets a little quasi-religious and whatnot, but, you know, it's not actually that different than Judeo-Christian theology when you talk about kind of being all-knowing and all this other stuff. But, you know, it definitely isn't dependent upon nature on planet Earth. And this concept, you know, generally known as the post-Earther concept, where you're post-Earth. You don't worry about the finite resources on planet Earth because you're not dependent upon them anymore as a true transhumanist entity. So I'm not personally religious, though I got to be honest, I was raised a Catholic, went to Catholic school and was grilled in Catholicism and the Judeo-Christian theology. And I read the Bible all the way through once, start to finish, and I sort of lost my religion after that. That said, I'm still a big believer in Jesus and in the gospel in terms of, you know, he was a truly great person, and these are truly kind things that he did, and these are things to emulate, things to strive for, to be more like Jesus. I just don't necessarily think that there's an afterlife for me that is, you know, in a Judeo-Christian sense. It may be that, you know, I'm more in terms of, you know, my degree was in philosophy at university, and my senior thesis was on brains in a vat, and the question was, can you prove that you're not just a brain being manipulated by some scientists on some other planet? And, you know, after 24 pages, I absolutely couldn't do it, and no philosopher on planet Earth has been able to do it. We're still kind of back and forth. So I'm like 50-50 on whether we're living in a paradigm, and this conversation is just part of some program that you and I have already been in. So, you know, maybe there is an afterlife through something like that. And I'm also the originator of this concept, theocidism, which is the idea that, you know, there's generally two ways of looking at religion. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. But I actually think there's a third way. And the third way is that God existed, but God chose to end its life in terms of merging with the universe and not to be a conscious entity. And so there's kind of what we call theocidism. This is sort of suicide of God, but you shouldn't look at it in terms of suicide, more in this terms of God created everything, just decided he didn't need to be a part of it anymore whatsoever, and or at least a conscious part of it. So he left it to us to do what we can with it. And maybe, I'm going to be honest, this is a little bit bizarre, but anyone that has studied the mathematics of the universe would say, well, wow, there are probably trillions and trillions of planets out there that are very similar to Earth or probably can host life. And to think that we would be the only species in the universe that's alive is, it'd be pure mathematically crazy. And to think that, we're in kind of the younger part of the universe, what we think, there's a very high probability that other parts of the universe have developed life, including intelligent life. And so, when you come down to the mathematics, most NASA scientists and most futurists would also say, well, it's not that there are other species out there, but there are probably billions and billions of intelligent life forms out there. And frankly, there are probably billions and billions of life forms out there that are far more intelligent than the human being is. And, this gets into the Fermi paradox and all these other ideas. But the bottom line is, I think there's a very good chance that while I may say I'm an atheist or an agnostic right now, the truth is that there's probably other intelligences out there that would almost be like God to me. And maybe there is something that happens in the afterlife because it's a paradigm that we're living in right now. But, I try to stick with a secular point of view because it's pretty easy to convey the message that, we need to try to use science and technology so that we don't die and become food for worms. And that's really where I think death is. I've had people die, and that's sort of what happens to them. They just disintegrate into the earth. And so in that sense, I'm a secular person with a lot of other thoughts going on. Well, yeah. So one of the, I guess one of the more popular articles I've ever written for the Huffington Post is that, we think transhumanism is actually, we think LGBT is actually a part of the transhumanist movement. And transhumanists, you have to understand, so the LGBT people might not like this because they have fought a very historic and tough fight to be accepted in society. But transhumanists are going way beyond what they're fighting for. We are people that want to become fish. We're people that want to upload ourselves to machines. We're people that are willing to get rid of the entire human body, let alone just a gender issue or something like that, or a sexuality issue. So the era of transhumanist civil rights is upon us, and we're really going to go down that path and try to, fight for it and make sure that we have rights to do whatever we want to do. And I think the LGBT movement fits in very perfectly with the transhumanist movement. I know plenty of LGBT people that are transhumanists, and I don't want to in any way try to, downplay the importance of their movement. But the importance of the transhumanist movement is a far larger idea of this concept of morphological freedom, which is our body belongs to ourselves, our minds belong to ourselves, and we should have the right to do with it whatever we want to do, including the idea of upgrading ourselves so that we're not even biological anymore to something else. But I definitely, I'd say, there's this total bond between transhumanism and LGBT and any type of group. The same thing with racism. Transhumanists are like, they don't look in terms of white or black or what the color of your skin is. I mean, we're people that might become robots and cyborgs and have green skin because we've integrated plant DNA into our skin. So we no longer even need to eat anymore because we just walk out into the sun and we get our nutrients from the sun. I mean, this is how far some universities are working on these kinds of experiments as we speak to try to end world hunger so that you don't even need to drink coffee or eat a cake or something to get nutrition. You can just walk out into the sun. So transhumanists are probably the most inclusive bunch of people that I have ever seen in my life. They have virtually no hangups except, basically probably the golden rule. Do unto others as you want them to do unto you. That's a pretty good rule to follow. So I'm excited for 5G internet. I'm excited for what's after it. I'm not that caught up on all the different technicalities of what 5G means, but I know it's going to be, a big boom to the technology industry in itself, especially when they talk about medical things like, scanning people for MRIs and things like that. That's really where I'm looking at any of this new type of technology that hits a national and global scale is, can it really start helping what we call the life extension movement? Because right now there seems to be a lot of slowness in terms of finding upgrades in university settings and hospitals for people living longer. It's like transhumanists keep talking this great game about life extension, and we're doing all sorts of amazing things with AI and robotics and genetic editing, but not that much is happening in terms of human beings living longer. So hopefully the 5G and other technologies like that will help spur that entire part of the industry that we seem to be lacking on. Sure. Well, I have a few books and just released a few books. I think the best book is The Futurist Cure, which is my latest book of kind of essays. And it combines all the best essays that I've written in the last 5-6 years from the New York Times, from Vice. I had a column at Vice for a long time, and just Newsweek and all these other ones. And you can just kind of get a good feel for the transhumanist movement. There's like 50 essays that are from all these different places. But my website, zoltanistvan.com, and you can just Google me. And, on Facebook, there are, not that I'm a giant fan of Facebook, but there are hundreds of transhumanist groups. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff happening on Twitter as well. And so, there's some, I guess just Google and find it. But the good news is that transhumanism is growing so large that it's really inescapable. You can't, avoid it anymore. I find it happening all the time, whether the New York Times is talking about it, whether podcasts are talking about it. And to find out more about my work, hopefully, you'll just find it. It's all out there. And I've thankfully become one of the main journalists of the movement. So a lot of times when you find a really positive article about transhumanism, it's something that I penned because I think this is great. I think we're saving lives, we're making people live longer, and we're also bringing the future closer. And what could be more exciting than this radical future we're talking about? I mean, it's an exciting time to be alive. We're talking about true transformation, and imagine the things that we're going to see, and imagine the things that we're going to do. I want to thank ApexTV for the opportunity to do this interview and to talk a little bit about transhumanism. And hopefully you're going to go out to your computers right now and check it out and just see what the movement's all about. But hopefully I'll see you in the transhumanist age.